My father folded his arms in the middle of my living room and looked me straight in the eye. "You have until midnight," he said. "Sell this house to your sister for $250,000, or don't ever call us your family again." The room went silent. Cardboard boxes were stacked against the walls. My younger sister leaned comfortably against the kitchen counter with a smile that made it clear she thought she'd already won. Around them stood my aunt, 2 cousins, and my mother, all watching me like this was some kind of intervention. "Larice," my mother said softly, "your sister needs this house more than you do." I looked around the room I'd spent 6 years paying for. Every mortgage payment, every repair, every weekend sacrificed working overtime. Not $1 had come from my parents. Not one. I swallowed hard and asked the only question that mattered. "So, this is really what all of you want?" Dad didn't hesitate. "You're 31, you can start over. Your sister deserves a chance. Either sign the papers tonight or we're done." My sister didn't even try to hide her smile. And somehow, that hurt more than the ultimatum. I lowered my eyes to the purchase agreement lying on the dining table. Then I reached for the pen. Nobody noticed that my hand wasn't shaking. Because they all thought I was giving up. They had no idea I already knew something they didn't. I signed where my attorney had marked the page, closed the folder, and slid it back across the table. "There," I said quietly. Dad nodded with satisfaction. "I knew you'd make the right decision." "It wasn't the right decision," I replied. "It was the only one you left me." No one answered. Within an hour, I was loading the last of my boxes into my car. My sister walked through every room, pointing at walls she'd repaint and furniture she'd replace before I had even backed out of the driveway. One cousin laughed. "Guess bigger houses really do belong to the favorite kid now." Nobody corrected him. Not even my mother. I looked at the front porch one last time before closing the trunk. I'd bought that house after years of 12-hour shifts, skipped vacations, and saying no to everything that wasn't absolutely necessary. My parents hadn't celebrated when I got the keys. They'd only asked why I needed such a nice place when my younger sister was still renting. Now they were acting as though giving it away was some noble act of family loyalty. Dad stepped onto the driveway. "I expect you won't make this difficult." "I won't," I answered. For the first time all evening, he actually looked relieved. He thought he'd won. I got into my car, drove 3 blocks away, pulled into an empty parking lot and took out my phone. My attorney answered on the second ring. "Everything is ready?" I asked. "It is," he replied without hesitation. "Once ownership changes, it's entirely on them." I looked back toward the neighborhood where my family was probably celebrating inside the house. I'd just surrendered. "Good," I said, ending the call. As I drove away, I couldn't stop thinking about one question. Why was I the only person who wasn't afraid of what would happen next? My first night after leaving the house was spent in a furnished 1-bedroom apartment that barely held the boxes I'd managed to pack. The place was quiet. Too quiet. I set my coffee mug on the windowsill and stared at the city lights until my phone buzzed. It was my best friend, Maya. "I've been waiting for you to call," she said. "Tell me you didn't actually let them force you into this." "I did." There was a long pause. "Larice, why?" I sank onto the couch. "Because arguing with my parents has never changed their minds." Maya sighed. "That's not an answer." "It is if you've known them as long as I have." As soon as I said it, memories came rushing back. When my sister wrecked her car in college, my parents paid for another one. When she fell behind on rent, they covered 6 months. When she quit 2 jobs in 1 year, they called her, still finding herself. But when I needed help with my down payment years ago, Dad folded his arms and said, "If you want a house, earn it yourself." So I had. I worked overtime nearly every weekend, skipped vacations, delayed replacing my old car, and saved every extra dollar until I could finally buy the home without asking anyone for help. Yet somehow I was the selfish daughter. Maya spoke again. So why do you sound calm? I opened the folder my attorney had prepared before the transfer. Several documents sat neatly inside. I glanced over them, then closed the folder before answering. Because fighting them would have accomplished nothing. You aren't telling me everything. No, I admitted, not yet. Meanwhile, my family was already celebrating. A cousin sent me a photo in the family group chat. My parents stood in my former kitchen smiling, while my sister held up a set of paint samples. The caption read, "Finally where she belongs." Without replying, I saved the picture, archived the conversation, and put my phone face down on the table. Minutes later, another call came in. This time it was my attorney. "The notification has officially been delivered." I looked toward the closed folder. "Thank you," I said quietly. By the next afternoon, my parents had turned the entire situation into a public victory. My mother posted a smiling family photo in front of my old house. "Family always comes first, so proud of our daughters for doing the right thing." The comments poured in. "You're wonderful parents. What a generous sister. This is what real family looks like." No one knew the house had never been a gift. No one knew I'd spent years paying every mortgage bill myself. I read the comments once, closed the app, and went back to unpacking another box. Later that evening, a family gathering was held at the house. I went because avoiding it would only fuel more rumors. As soon as I walked in, my aunt smiled awkwardly. "Larice, I hope there aren't any hard feelings." Before I could answer, my sister interrupted. "I'm already talking to contractors. The kitchen is definitely getting remodeled." Dad laughed. "With the neighborhood improving, this place will probably double in value." I simply nodded. "You should read every document before making changes." The room grew quiet for a second. My sister rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, you're trying to scare me because you're bitter." Dad waved dismissively. "There's always paperwork after a property transfer, nothing unusual." Just then the doorbell rang. A courier stood outside, holding a large certified envelope. Delivery for the legal owner of the property. My sister signed without hesitation and tore it open. She skimmed the first page for only a few seconds before tossing the packet onto the counter. "Looks like boring legal stuff." I recognized the heading immediately. It was the redevelopment agreement. No one else in the room seemed to notice. My phone vibrated with a missed call from an unfamiliar number. A few minutes later, the same number called my sister. She declined it. "They're persistent," she muttered. Dad chuckled. "Probably someone trying to sell you insurance." I said only one thing. "You really should return that call." He looked at me with open annoyance. "Enough, Larice, stop trying to ruin your sister's moment." I didn't argue. Less than an hour later, 2 vehicles pulled into the driveway. Several people wearing company badges stepped out carrying clipboards and site plans. One of them walked straight to the front door and asked, "We're here to meet the current legal owner of the property." The conversation in the living room stopped the moment the representative stepped inside. My sister straightened her shoulders. "I'm the owner." The man leading the group introduced himself, then handed her a folder. "We're here regarding the redevelopment agreement attached to this property. We need to discuss your compliance timeline." She frowned. "I think you've got the wrong address." He calmly shook his head. "We've confirmed the ownership transfer with the county. You're now the responsible party." Dad stepped forward. "There must be some mistake. She just bought the house." "There isn't a mistake," the representative replied. "The obligations transfer with ownership." My sister flipped through the folder, her confidence fading with each page. "I've never seen any of this." I finally spoke. "I told you to read every document." Dad turned toward me. "So you knew about this?" "I knew there were agreements tied to the property. That's why I kept telling all of you to read everything before making changes." The representative excused himself after scheduling a mandatory meeting for the following morning. As soon as the front door closed, my father rounded on me. "You planned this." I met his stare without raising my voice. "No," I disclosed everything that was legally required. "You were the ones who insisted the transfer happen immediately." My aunt, who had witnessed the entire ultimatum days earlier, looked at my father. "Didn't Larice warn everyone more than once?" No one answered. My sister sat at the dining table, turning pages faster now, stopping every few moments to reread paragraphs she'd ignored earlier. The excitement about remodeling disappeared. Instead, she kept whispering, "I didn't know, I didn't know." Over the next few days, the pressure only grew. Certified letters arrived. Phone calls became more frequent. Deadlines were outlined in writing. Each time my parents called me, they demanded the same thing. "Undo this." "I can't," I answered every time. "The agreements were triggered when ownership changed. I don't have the authority to reverse them." On the 5th day, my phone rang again. Then again. And again. My sister had called 8 times before I finally answered. Her breathing was uneven. "Larice," she whispered. I waited. "Please, don't let him find out." She suddenly stopped. Someone in the background had started talking to her. I stayed on the line. In the background, I could hear a man's calm, professional voice. "Ms. Carter, we need your signature acknowledging receipt of the compliance notice." My sister covered the phone. "Larice, please, if he finds out I already started making changes to the property." I closed my eyes. "The developer already knows." She began crying. "I thought it was just paperwork. I told you to read it." "I know." The line went quiet except for her breathing. Months before my parents ever gave me their ultimatum, the neighborhood had been selected for a major redevelopment project. My attorney and I had negotiated an agreement that protected my interests while dramatically increasing the property's long-term value. The agreement also imposed strict obligations on whoever legally owned the house. Every transfer document disclosed that those obligations would automatically pass to the next owner. That was why I had tried to slow everything down. Not because I wanted to keep the house from my sister, because I knew the new owner needed to understand exactly what they were accepting. Instead, my parents refused to listen. They were so determined to force me into selling the house for $250,000 that every warning became, in their minds, another excuse from their selfish daughter. My sister signed every page placed in front of her without reading it. She trusted our parents more than the paperwork. That decision now belonged to her. A week later, my attorney met with me and reviewed the entire file one last time. "Every disclosure was documented," he said, sliding the binder across the table. "The redevelopment company confirmed receipt of the transfer, and all legal responsibilities shifted exactly as the contract required. So there's nothing left for me to do." He shook his head. "No, you fulfilled every obligation." The story didn't stay private for long. Relatives who had watched my father force the ultimatum began comparing what they had witnessed with the documents that surfaced afterward. My aunt confronted him during another family gathering. "You told everyone Larice was hiding something," she said. "She wasn't, you ignored every warning she gave." No one defended him. For the first time I could remember, my father had no answer. My mother quietly admitted something that changed the room. "We honestly believed Larice would sacrifice whatever she had if we pushed hard enough." Those words landed harder than any apology. They explained years of birthdays, holidays, and family decisions. I had always been expected to carry the cost because I was the dependable one. My sister eventually asked to meet me. She looked exhausted. "I spent my whole life believing I deserved whatever Mom and Dad said I deserved," she admitted. "I never questioned it." "I'm not angry that you wanted the house," I told her. "I'm angry that you never questioned why it had to be taken from me." She nodded without arguing. "I'm sorry." It didn't erase what happened, but it was the first honest conversation we'd ever had. The financial consequences remained exactly where they belonged, with the people who had insisted on the transfer without understanding it. As for me, the redevelopment agreement protected the value I had spent years building. With the proceeds and the safeguards my attorney had negotiated, I bought another home in a different neighborhood and started over on my own terms. I stopped measuring family by shared last names. Instead, I surrounded myself with people who never demanded that I prove my love by giving away pieces of my life. My parents reached out several times after that. I answered once, "I don't hate you," I said, "but I won't return to being the daughter who was expected to lose so everyone else could win." When I ended the call, I realized I hadn't lost my family that night. I'd lost the illusion that they had ever treated me fairly. And somehow, that felt more freeing than painful. The day my parents told me I didn't deserve my own house was the day they unknowingly gave me the freedom to walk away, and they were the ones who paid the price.